Uh, when you're making an informational video, you have to take information from other sources, right? You're not discovering the information. You're not doing a ton of research. Like, it's not just you, right? So you are sharing your opinions, and you're organizing the information in particular ways. But for the video, all you have to do, I mean, you're expected to use other sources to find the information, right? Just give it credit. That's it. Even if you watch somebody else do a very similar video, what do? You give it credit in a works cited or in a bibliography page. That's it. Because I don't expect you to already have all this information about the topic in your head. If you do, that's great. You use that, right? But if you don't, all you have to do is cite. And it's not cheating if you're citing somebody else's video. It's not cheating if you're citing Wikipedia. It's not cheating if you're citing, the history.com website. It's not. You're just letting me know where you grab the information. That's it. Right. So that's why for the video project, you do have to give me a bibliography or a works cited page. Right. Let me go into our course here. So for the video project. So remember that you're giving me not just the videos, but also the bibliography or works cited page. How you format that, it's up to you. As long as you're giving me all the sources you used, that's perfectly fine. Nobody has tried submitting this assignment yet. So there's a few things I want to talk about in terms of submitting. When you submit, and let me go to the student view of this. You should be able to just upload files, like the raw files from like your phone or the computer, right? Upload file. If they are bigger files, they might take a while to upload. So that's the biggest reason to not wait until Sunday by midnight to upload the files, is that sometimes Canvas just takes forever to upload a file. You can also, though, submit a website URL. So if you use TikTok, for example, and you published it so people could view it, you could just put the link here. That's it, right? Or if you want to give me all the links separately in a Word or Google Doc file, you can do that as well. I know some people were having trouble trying to use TikTok. Like, you have TikTok, and then the feature that allowed you to film 3-minute videos was some days there, some days it was not there, like things like that. If stuff like that is happening, some technology issue like that, let me know. I have no problem if it keeps happening and you've already designed your videos around having to use TikTok. Well, all right. Use whatever feature it's allowing you to have. If you're submitting to me, I don't know, 5-6 videos, as long as they all equal the total amount of minutes required for the activity, I will be fine with that. I just need to know that you're doing that because TikTok's being a jerk to you. Oh, Crystal, so it's the bibliography and the works cited to me are the same thing. They're technically a little different. I don't expect you to submit a bibliography and a works cited page. It's just depending on how you think of it and whether you use MLA format, APA, or Chicago style. They're called different things, but to me it's the same thing. It's a list of the sources you used. So you're only submitting one of those along with your 3 videos. Yeah. Like some people call it, works cited or bibliography. To me, it's the same thing. So as long as your video equals 9 minutes, that's fine. You can send me a quick email, or in your submission, let me know I was having trouble with TikTok. It was not giving me the feature, or I had trouble, whatever the issue may be. You can let me know, right? Let's see, what other issues have been coming up with having this? I think that's the issues I've heard from. So if other stuff are coming up as you're working on it, let me know. I will be probably up Friday, Sunday by midnight, making sure that I'm available to answer questions. But again, the biggest thing is if Canvas is taking forever to upload. If for some reason Canvas is not working for you, you can always email me. a file. With large files, that can be a problem, and that's why I'm like, Canvas should work, but we'll work with whatever technology issues there are. I'm like, if Canvas is down, for example, then Canvas is down. What are we going to do? I will wait till the next day till they fix the problem and then upload the videos there. Remember that it's 3 videos. Yeah, there was a little bit of confusion. It's 3 videos. Each video is 3 minutes. That's why some people are running into problems if they don't have that feature on like TikTok. But you can always use your phone or the computer to film a video. And then each video is 3 minutes, then you shouldn't have any problem with that. If you choose to use TikTok, it does not have to be posted publicly, Maria. That's a great question. You can just post it privately and save it to your device and then submit the file on Canvas. That's exactly what you would need to do, Maria, in order for me to see it. Yeah, because if you post it privately, then not only like nobody will be able to see it, including me. I need to be able to see your file in order to grade it. If I can't see your file, I can't grade it. Lena, yeah, you have a question?
So I'm like, we just went over it about the 3-minute 3 videos, so it can't be like 1 9-minute video because it's too long for
So ideally not. And I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, because I want to see how you're making the choices to divide the comments. But if it's easier for you to do 1 9-minute video on a topic, I will accept that. I will accept that. I'll take it. But there was a point. I'm like, there is the method to the madness. Dividing it into 3 minutes, it's easier to digest on websites like TikTok, right? And what happens with a lot of you Gen Zers is that you don't like to watch 9-minute videos. Like,
true.
Like that's the point, right? Like y'all just won't. You will scroll right past that. And so I was like, okay, well, if people are unwilling to watch longer videos now, then let's create content in shorter videos so that's easier to learn.
Got it. Thank you.
Allison, or zero attention span. Yeah, although I have to say the zero attention span has been going on for a long time. I'm an older millennial. My generation was accused of having zero attention span all the time. And there's always some truth to it. There are always some truth to it, but I think it's also exaggerated. When we all want to, when we need to, we can pay attention. A lot of times we just don't want to. That's my take. Okay, so today I am gonna present new material for you all, but I'm going to do this week that I'm going to cancel class on Wednesday. So no one has to be here on the Zoom on Wednesday, but I will be here on Wednesday. Right? So I'm going to run class like a kind of office hour. So if you need to come talk to me about the video assignment, if you need to talk about anything at all, I will be here the entire class period.
But you have ice cream and cake if I come?
Damn it, no. Well, even if I did, I wouldn't be able to share it. But no, but the goal there is anybody that is having any issues or wants to talk to me privately, that's the time to do it. Also, because you all should be working on it, I want to encourage people who haven't yet started doing the videos to get to it rather than come in here and listen to new material. Right. It's also my birthday, so I think when I planned the schedule this way, I think I did it on purpose. I'm not 100% sure I did it on purpose, but if I did, thank you, past Cynthia, because I appreciated it. But again, just because I'm canceling class doesn't mean that I won't be available. And please, I don't care that it's my birthday. Please, if you have questions, if there are things we need to talk about, come. That's why I'm still going to be on Zoom and I'm not canceling Zoom. Crystal, you should send us cake and food via FedEx. Oh no, then it becomes like I'm throwing myself like a quinceañera or something, and I become responsible for feeding everyone. I'm too old to throw a quinceañera. Oh, look at you all encouraging this. No, I'm like, I know some professors that will just cancel class on their birthday. And when I find out they were doing that, I was like, you can do that? I thought we weren't supposed to do that. But no, I'm like this is, I always do this before a big assignment. I'll cancel class so that the focus can be on working on your assignment. Any other questions about the video assignment? Can I cancel class on your birthday? Yeah, you all would love to cancel class too, right? Well, I mean, you could always show up and not tell me it's because of your birthday. Well, even if you told me it was for your birthday, I'd be like, okay, you still have to do the work, but you can do it a different day. The reality is, once you're an adult, I'm like, you can do. I'm like, those are the fun things about being an adult. Do we need to use academic sources? Alondra, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. I just want you to use reliable sources. For a video project, you don't use the conspiracy theory websites, and you don't use just random people on the internet putting information. But a site like Wikipedia does work for this assignment, right? And I'll show you why. Wikipedia does work for this assignment. Normally, it won't work for a research paper. Wikipedia doesn't necessarily work. But a lot of civil rights topics have been vetted by scholars on Wikipedia, because my generation, millennials, used Wikipedia so much that scholars went in and made sure that the topics that are in there that they're experts on were correct. So, for example, I'm going to put the Black Panther Party. A bunch of you were interested in the Black Panther Party, even though I didn't spell it correctly. So if you scroll down, Wikipedia is the second result that comes up when you Google the Black Panther Party. Well, so much of this information is actually cited, right? It comes from books or articles, academic articles written by scholars. That means that this article on the Black Panther Party is actually very good. It's very good. So a lot of this information you can use as a reliable source of information. Right. On the other hand, you might go into some other articles that are not cited. If you're using a Wikipedia article that is not well cited, right? Or if you go down to look at the sources that are being cited, and you're not seeing like academic works, things that are reliable, if it's all like, conspiracy websites or some random video online, then you can't trust it. This one, I can tell you, is pretty well sourced. In fact, I'm looking at a bunch of the stuff I've read that is actually being cited on this in this Wikipedia article. So, like if you're doing the Black Panthers, Wikipedia is reliable. But I would actually urge you, by the way, those of you who are doing the Black Panther Party, there are a lot of really good sources that were recently published. The Black Panther Party, a graphic novel. This is one of them. This just came out like last year or something like that. It's a graphic novel, but the information in this graphic novel is really, really, really good. And I'm highlighting this one in particular because it should be available at most public libraries. I know the Los Angeles Public Library has several copies of this graphic novel, and that you can get it online as an ebook as well as the physical book. And that, like, it's a really excellent graphic novel, and it doesn't just like it'll talk about both the good and the bad elements of the Black Panther Party. Right. Anyway, those are there was another question in the chat. Let me see if I can bring it up, chat. If my videos can't submit, can I submit them as a zip file? Yes, zip files are acceptable. More than acceptable. They work. Yes, if you all haven't heard, the student loan forgiveness website, the applications have opened up for student loan forgiveness. I haven't yet filed mine, but I will be doing it this week. I'm going to go in It's supposed to be very fast and easy. Fill out your information to get up to $10,000 of student loan forgiveness. Now, there are some requirements on there, but so it won't forgive the most recent loans, for example. But if anybody has, especially some older loans, especially if you have older siblings that have a lot of student debt, it should hopefully help a lot of people. When they looked at the math, especially Latino students are supposed to benefit a lot from the $10,000 forgiven, or Ali, thank you, or 20,000 if you receive Pell Grants. And if you already paid, like right now when we've been on pause for it, if you've been making payments and like, let's say you finished paying off all your loans while the payments have been paused, you can get that money back. Everything you paid during that period, up to $10,000 or $20,000, can be forgiven. Yeah. So thank you, Ali. Yes, for reminding that. I can even post under resources. I'll post the link on Canvas. They should forgive old, current. I mean, I'm in favor of just forgive it all. If you ask me, forgive it all. I'll be honest. I didn't have student loans when I was an undergraduate. All my loans are graduate loans, so I have no hope that they will all be forgiven at any point, because it was for a PhD. It wasn't for a bachelor's. But they're never going to see all their money back. Just realistically speaking, they loaned me too much money. They should have. I'm like, they made some bad decisions in loaning me money for a PhD in history. I expected to be able to pay it back. I wasn't the one who failed here. Yes, Sarah, I do want you to turn in not just the videos, but a list of your sources in either a works cited page or a bibliography format. Yes, I want to see what you used what information, where you got the information for your video. Okay, let's talk about forced sterilizations, because a bunch of you, I was so amazed at how many of you were interested in this topic, and it is a really important topic. Oh, Medea, excellent question. It doesn't have to be APA. You can use whatever style you want to use. I don't care. As long as you're citing your sources, that's all I care about. But so a lot of you were interested in this topic, and I had already scheduled it for today for us to talk about it today. And it is a topic that is really important to me, because a lot of us don't know about this, and these forced sterilizations have been happening. It's been a recent issue, so it's important to talk about the history of science and medicine and how race has played an important part of it, right? And it goes back way back to just the establishing of medical schools. Right? Like, one of the things that medical schools did in order to have their students prepare to be doctors, and at the time it was all white students, right? Medical schools, for the most part, were not accepting Black students. Black medical schools were established, but initially all the medical schools in the US were accepting only white students. They needed to practice on human bodies. The way doctors get trained today is still by practicing on cadavers, practicing on dead bodies. And you kind of want that, right? You don't want a doctor who's operating on you to have never gone inside a human body, to not know where everything is. Like, you want your doctor to have some hands-on experience. And the way they do that is practicing on cadavers. Now, more recently, they have more different technological ways of giving doctors even more practice, because one of the problems is finding bodies to practice on is hard for medical schools, and has always been hard. In the 1800s and the 19th century, people didn't want to donate their body to science. They didn't want them to be dissected by students in a medical school. Even today, there's still a lot of people that are not organ donors and don't want to donate their body to science, right? In a 2004 survey, they said that 49% of the population was willing to do it. But within the African-American population, it was much lower. It was 70% fewer African-Americans said they would donate their body to science. And so that raises a really important question. Why are African Americans less likely to want to donate their body to science? What's going on there? So I want to ask you all in class, how many of you are organ donors? No one? Do I have no organ donors in the, okay. Alexandra, okay, a few organ donors. Okay, then let's start with why are most people in our class, why don't we fit the statistic? Why do most people not want to be organ donors? Like, you can tell me why you don't want to be an organ donor, or what are the reasons someone would give for not wanting to be an organ donor? Yeah, Alexandra?
Oh, sorry, I just forgot to lower my
Oh.
hand. But I mean, even with like choosing to donate, there was the time where I was debating if it was a good idea.
Mhm.
My mom, she does it, so right away I have that influence that she's an organ donor. But I would just say fear of the unknown, really. You know, what is it going to be used for? Is it going to be used for something that's good? But
Yeah.
I watched this YouTube that was about just basically this boy didn't make it through a trendy thing that he saw through social media, and he tried it, and he is now in a coma, and they're going to donate all of his organs, and apparently it saves up to 8 lives.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And there is a huge shortage of organs because and not everybody can donate their organs, right? Like, if you just die at home, not in a hospital, very quickly your organs cannot be donated. So it's very particular conditions in which organs can be donated, and so there's a long waiting list of people waiting for organs. So there's always a need for organs. But some of the reasons you all are talking about are very common, right? One, if you're not sure how to be one, now officially, when you get your ID or your driver's license is when you get an official sticker put on your ID that tells medical personnel that you are an organ donor. Religious reasons, the common reason for why people don't want to be organ donors. If in your personal beliefs you believe that the body needs to be kind of intact, then that becomes an important reason to do that. Ali, this is the most common thing I hear. People seem to think that doctors are less likely to want to save you and do everything possible to save your life if you're an organ donor, because there's a shortage of organs for people who are sick. Oh, okay. Some people said for political reasons. That's an interesting one. I hadn't heard that one before. They have found that a lot of the people that say, like, you don't want the doctors to cut into you too quickly and give up on saving you, that a lot of us have that idea because of television. If you're watching Grey's Anatomy, House, or whatever all the medical shows are, right? It tends to, every season, they have one or more storylines revolving around organs being needed. And that's where we get that idea. In reality, that doesn't really happen. And some of these are very valid reasons not to be an organ donor, right? It turns out that a lot of people also don't want to be organ donors because of a history of how medical schools were using what they were doing to get cadavers, right? In the 19th century, most of the American population did not want to donate their body to science or be organ donors, right? So what medical schools would do is they would steal bodies. They would steal bodies, particularly from Black cemeteries. And why Black cemeteries and not white cemeteries? Well, some of it is the racism, but some medical schools actually tried. They preferred having white cadavers to practice on. They tried stealing from white cemeteries, and also cemeteries were divided by race at this point. There were cemeteries where only white people would be buried, and cemeteries where Black people would only be buried. And they tried stealing bodies from white cemeteries. And what they found was that it was really difficult. They were much better protected, and that the consequences from stealing bodies from white cemeteries would be more severe. The school not only would get fined, but people would go to jail. So they immediately switched out of stealing bodies from white cemeteries to looking for them in Black cemeteries, where the cemetery was less likely to be protected, like no security personnel guarding the Black cemeteries. And when people were found out, they were less likely to be punished severely for the crime of grave robbing, right? And very quickly, like Black communities realized this was happening, that right around the time in which medical started, when the semester started, all of a sudden there was evidence of grave robbing in Black cemeteries. So people that lived near medical schools knew that if you don't want your body to be stolen, if you can plan your death, you would not plan it around that time. So they would try to do things to prevent bodies from being stolen from cemeteries. They would try to, first of all, not bury bodies in the cemetery. If a family member died around the time the medical school semester started, which is when they were more likely to need bodies, people just wouldn't bury their loved ones in the cemetery. They would bury them at home or in an unmarked grave, where the family knew where it was located, but nobody else would know that was a grave, to try to prevent the stealing of bodies. Sometimes the family would try to, run shifts to protect the cemetery, but it was very difficult. You can't always have somebody at the cemetery just watching to protect the graves. And for a lot of Black people, especially during this time, it was like an extra kind of burden, that not only was your body not fully your own, but even in death, your body would not be allowed to rest. So for a lot of people, it was seen as an extension of slavery, this kind of slavery being extended into eternity, as your body was not allowed to rest. So medical schools have a long history of doing really illegal things, especially in Black communities, right? And so that is part of the reason why, especially within the Black population, there is less people wanting to donate organs or donate their body to science, right? And there was all these racist ideas at the time that people thought were scientific, right? So for example, in the 1800s, a lot of academics, a lot of white experts believed that Black people would go extinct by the year 2000. They thought that they had the data to prove that people would go extinct by the year 2000. Yeah, Maria, it's particularly horrible. And it caused problems today. We'll talk about that too. But why in the world would they think that Black people would go extinct? Because we were past the year 2000. We know this didn't happen. Yeah, Lena, it's people actually, these were academics, like people who had a lot of education were making the argument that Black people would go extinct by the year 2000. They believed it because they were looking at rates of sickness within the Black population. Particularly, they saw the census data, right? The Constitution mandates that a census of the American population be done. And when the census were done in the 1800s, what they found was that free Black people had really high rates of disease, really high rates. So they were way more likely to be sick than white people, and also way more likely to be sick than enslaved people. So to white people, this seemed like proof. This is evidence, data, that slavery is better for Black people because they're healthier when they're slaves. When they're free, they're more likely to get diseases, was the thought. right? And so this is how a lot of white people come to believe that there were Black diseases, things that were clearly affecting Black people more than any other racial or ethnic group. So things like tuberculosis, malaria, syphilis, and also mental health disorders. And to them, this was evidence that Black people were more or less moral, worse off than white people, right? They're like, aha, this is evidence that white people are better. We're clearly better than Black people because just look at how sick Black people get. And therefore, they're a danger to us. They're carrying around tuberculosis and malaria. If we allow Black people near us, they're going to get us sick. Well, we know that they're wrong. We know that they're wrong, but they have data. They had information, numbers to prove their argument. Until a mathematician went into the census data, right? He started looking at these numbers of, okay, Black people seem to have higher rates of disease. They tend to be sicker more often. So he looks at the math that comes out of the census data from the 1800s. And he sees that the math was done wrong. The equations that they were using were the wrong ones. They weren't adding things correctly. Like the math was just wrong. So that threw the whole census data into question for the mathematician. He's like, but okay, maybe they just did the math wrong, but maybe the information in there is still gonna, like, once you do the math right, you're still gonna get the same answer. So he goes into the actual census data collected during the 1800s. And what he finds out is that a lot of the information collected on the Black population in the 1800s was completely made up. Completely made up. So they would pay, right? A lot like they do now. They would pay people to go door to door collecting information. So they'd knock on a door, write down the address, write down how many people live there, and then information they would collect would be like, are these people sick or not? Well, a lot of these census takers would just write down an address, make up a number of people, and they would say, like, if it was supposed to be a Black home with all Black people, they would just label them all sick and pick random diseases for these people. And how did he know? Because he compared it to, like, in some communities where there was like, wait, this is an address that doesn't exist. If you try to look up this house, there's nothing there. No house. There was never any house there. Nobody living there. So it was very clear when the census takers were just making things up. Other times there would be a house where Black people lived, but the census takers didn't want to waste their time knocking on the door, so they would just make up information. So even when they were not making up the address, they were still making up, they were just like, okay, we'll just say 5 people are sick. And once you went in and verified it, no, it turns out nobody's sick in this house. So there, I mean, public health policies, politicians, public health officials were making decisions based on data that was completely wrong. But the racism made it seem like, aha, this information it's confirming what I already know. Therefore, they didn't even question it. They didn't even question it. Yeah, Medea, the repercussions for this false information was big in terms of how people were making decisions. Like, this was some of the reasoning given for the need to segregate people. So this census information was used up until the 20th century, right? It was still being used to try to maintain racial separation between groups. Now, yes, technically this should have been illegal, providing false information on these official government documents, right? Nobody did anything. The mathematician went to government officials to make sure that the government knew that the census information was wrong. He went to newspapers because a lot of newspapers were publishing articles based on that census information. And so he went to the newspapers and told them, hey, the math is wrong. The data is made up. You cannot, you should print retractions. Nobody listened. Nobody listened. The government was like, oh, okay. Kept on using that data to make decisions. And even the newspapers were like, okay. They continued printing articles based on that information, no retractions, no nothing, no clarification. So people knew that the census data was false or at best questionable. Nothing. And that's why you get, like, when people were trying to figure out what to do after slavery, right? After the Civil War, they were trying to figure out, they thought there's too much racism in the US. We need to do something. Some of the decisions or some of the proposals were, for example, to send all Black people in the United States to Africa. They were even negotiating with some African countries to provide land where every African American would be sent to. But then the counter argument to that was, well, we're not going to need to. Black people have such high rates of disease that they're all going to die off anyway. And that will solve the problem of racism in America. Like that Black people would just die. And therefore, you didn't even have to send them out of the US because they were just going to die. All of it absurd, right? We know today it's absurd. And it sounds like some weird conspiracy theory, like, no, you can't be serious. Well, yes, they're very, very serious. Right? And this kind of racism is such a part of medicine, of how doctors are trained, that it's been really hard to get doctors to not not use some of the racism that has been part of the field for a really long time, right? So, for example, one of the direct consequences of viewing syphilis as a Black disease was a study that was done. It began in the 1930s. The goal of this study was to see how syphilis developed in Black men. Right? They're like, aha, syphilis looks totally different in Black men versus white men, which is not correct. Syphilis does not care what race you are. But they thought, okay, we need to study how syphilis looks in Black men. And syphilis is an interesting disease because you can contract syphilis and not have any symptoms for decades. People can go decades without knowing they have syphilis. But then once you start exhibiting symptoms of syphilis, it can move really quickly. Sometimes syphilis will move really quickly and the end result is death. Right? And syphilis has been around for a really long time. It used to be thought of as like an artist disease, that, a lot of poets, writers, artists got syphilis and died of syphilis. We think Benjamin Franklin actually had syphilis and probably died of it. So, all right, in the 1930s, they decide they're going to study how syphilis works. So they go into a Black neighborhood and they start testing. They bring people in to test them for syphilis. They promise them that if they detect anything wrong, they're going to get treatment. But people didn't know that they were getting tested for syphilis. They just thought they were going in for a checkup. Then the people running the study find that there are a bunch of men that were testing positive for syphilis, some that were not, right? And they decide that they're going to include all these men in the study. They're going to follow the group of men who have tested positive for syphilis and those that have not. Well, they never tell any of them that they were testing positive. That is highly unethical, If somebody tested positive for a disease, you're supposed to tell them. Especially though, egregious, especially bad though, is that these doctors, these scientists were telling the men that they needed to check in with them every few years and that they would get treated for whatever sickness they had. Right? This was to try to get them to keep coming back to the checkups, right? Because for a lot of these men, getting health care would be difficult, right? They don't have access to reliable, good health care. So they would keep showing up to the study in order to get regular checkups. Now, at first in the 1930s, when the study first began, there was not a good treatment for syphilis. If you tested positive for syphilis, the most common treatment was mercury. They would give you mercury to treat syphilis. Now, mercury does not actually treat syphilis. In fact, they were helping to kill people faster. That was in the early 1930s. But by the 1940s, they discovered that penicillin cured syphilis. Right? And penicillin was widely available by that point. It's a really simple cure. If somebody is testing positive for syphilis, all they needed was penicillin and they would be cured. The study goes on till the 1970s. It's not shut down until 1972. The men that were positive for syphilis were never told that they had syphilis, and they were never treated for syphilis. As a result, a lot of these men were young when they were first tested. They end up getting married, passing on the syphilis to their wives, having kids. A lot of kids were born with syphilis because both parents had it and they weren't getting any treatment for it. And in fact, there were a handful of men who end up getting tested somewhere else for syphilis and getting treated. The minute that happens, the people running the study would go to the clinics and say, here's a list of all the men that are taking part of our study. You cannot test them for syphilis and you cannot treat them for syphilis. So not only were they not telling people what was going on, they were not treating people, but they were preventing other doctors from treating these men. It's notorious. This Tuskegee syphilis study is notorious because it breaks every ethical law in the way you run these studies. You're not supposed to run these studies this way. And in fact, very likely the study also broke the law. They also broke the law. But guess how many people were prosecuted for their participation in the study? How many doctors and scientists? 0. Yeah, Tasha. Some of them, they all went on to have careers after their participation in the study. Some of them won awards and were celebrated for their contributions to the field of medicine. Publicly, in the 70s, the reason they shut down the study was because an expose was published. The public found out about the study, and that's why it immediately was shut down. Well, the person the public blamed the most was there was one nurse they had hired to keep track of the men, because sometimes people move and they wanted to make sure they were keeping track of the men. So they hired this Black nurse to search for the men, find them, and convince them to continue participating in the study. So the only person that really suffered any consequences was the Black nurse, because she was never able to work after the information came out, and she was deeply hated. Even within the Black community, people saw her as a traitor. Like, how could she do that to these men? That she knew what was going on and that she was helping the doctors take advantage of the Black men. She says that she didn't know exactly what they were doing. which is highly unlikely. But still, for her to be the only one publicly blamed for something that she was not in charge of feels pretty racist, because the doctors were mostly white. And they all got to go on and have careers, and she ends up not being able to work again. So there's a long, very racist history in the development of medicine and in the practice of medicine, right? I want to talk about that to set up something that was happening around the same time in California. Right, we've talked a little bit about how California was the center of eugenics research and eugenics practices. Well, the way it was very clearly practiced was through forced sterilization of Latina women. Right, from the 1930s till the 1970s, Latina women, most of them immigrant women, though not all of them, some of them were American citizens, were sterilized without their consent at LA County USC Hospital. Right? Many of these women would go in to give birth. Right? They were giving birth, and they were signing consent forms, allowing the doctors to also sterilize them, or what is commonly known as tying their tubes, getting their tubes tied. Basically, they were going to be unable to have children after that. So this happened from the 1930s to the 1970s. 1930s to 1970s, we found cases of women sterilized without their consent. Right? We know that this was racist because there was the whistleblower. Right? You might think, well, maybe they were just sterilizing everybody. Because there wasn't, during this period of time, there was a lot of worry about the growth of the population in the planet, right? Especially in the 70s, there was a lot of worry that too many people in the planet were hurting the environment. Then why were only Latina women being targeted? And what the whistleblower talks about is how doctors and nurses at the LA County Hospital were talking about how Latina women just reproduce way quicker than white women, that they were constantly having children and being a burden on social services. And that there was a general attitude that these women needed to be stopped, prevented from having children. So I'm going to play you a clip from the documentaries called No Más Bebés, No More Babies. It's a really fantastic documentary, but it can be really hard to watch. Well, one, the content is hard to watch, but also usually in order to find it online, you have to pay. But has anybody seen it, maybe in class? Has anybody seen No Más Bebés? No? Okay, well, I'm going to play you a clip from this documentary, because they're talking to the whistleblower who was trying to find, like, he was talking to representatives, political representatives, to the newspapers, trying to find somebody that would look into the cases. He had evidence that these women had been sterilized without their consent, right? And nobody would pay attention to him. Some of the women were finding out that this was happening only because they were trying to have more children. Then they would go get checkups at the doctor to try to figure out what's wrong, why they couldn't get pregnant. And then they would find out that they had been sterilized, that their tubes had been tied. And they were like, when, how, why? Like they had never been told. Some of the women were too ashamed to come forward. But there were a group of women that came forward and sued the hospital in the state of California for the sterilizations. Yeah, these sterilizations are like, once you get them, like they're not reversible. So okay, let me press play. We're gonna watch like 10 minutes of this.
Around with a couple of investigative reporters from the LA Times. One thing I picked up this year was a whole new prejudice. I didn't have anything against Mexicans when I came here.
Is it blocked? Can you not see it at all?
No.
Oh, these jerks.
You can hear it, but not see it.
Okay, well, that is, I'm like, really? Oh man. Okay, let me stop sharing. Because I know they block streaming, but this is not on streaming. I'm like, I have the DVD. I paid for the stupid thing so I could show it in class. Okay. Well, I'm going to try to find a workaround that, and I will bring it to class next week. So hopefully see it, because the thing that you find is that the whistleblower, he was writing letters to everybody, trying to find a lawyer, a politician that would expose what was happening at LA County, at the LA County Hospital.
It
Right.
flashed for like 1 second. I saw like an image of a man standing by something real fast, but it went back gray.
Okay, I'll find some workaround. I'm like, I'm gonna have to consult my brother on how to illegally show things. But I'll work. Yeah, the man you saw was the whistleblower.
We can hear it. I could hear it. We just couldn't see the picture.
Picture. No, and I want you to see the picture because they interviewed for the documentary. They interviewed the doctor in charge of the LA County Hospital, like the head of the hospital, who had been hired specifically because he was so well renowned, he was so well respected, and he was going to come help redo the LA County Hospital. And they talk about how, yeah, he comes in, and there are several doctors that testified that he came in and he told them that we need to do something about these Mexican women. We need to do something about these Mexican women, and basically gave them permission to perform these sterilizations. They ask him, right? Hey, these doctors say that you had a meeting with them and that you were giving permission. You were telling them to do sterilizations. And he says, I did not. That never happened. And other doctors will come in and they say, at a hospital, nothing happened, something like that, because it was so widespread. It goes on from the 1930s to the 1970s. Every single decade, women were being sterilized without their consent. Things like that don't happen without the people at the top knowing and approving of it. The women in the documentary talk about how their lives completely changed by this, right? They had wanted to be mothers, and were prevented from it, and they even caused problems within their marriages. Some of the women ended up getting divorced because their husbands thought that they were being cheated on. They said only women who are sleeping around get sterilized. Only bad women get their tubes tied. So there was a lot of a stigma within the Latino community about the kinds of women that would not want to have more children. And so some of the marriages end. Some of them continue, but then they have problems because they had always planned on having more kids, and now they cannot have kids. For most of these women, there was a significant impact on their sense of who they were and their sense of, their family. Right? And this all is eugenics. A central part of eugenics is making sure that the right genes are the ones that are being reproduced, right? That the correct genes are being passed on. And for eugenic scientists, that's Aryan genes, white genes, right? As a result, then, any other gene needs to be eliminated from the society. That's the premise of eugenics, right? You promote Aryan genes, and you prevent any other genes from being reproduced. Well, how do you do that? Well, through sterilizations. The same thing was done in Nazi Germany, where Jewish women were being sterilized without their consent. They were forcing abortions on Jewish women who were already pregnant to try to prevent any more Jewish people from being born, was the idea, right? Well, it's the same thing as what was being done in California, that these women, just because they were Latina, right? That was the only requirement for these doctors. Some of these doctors didn't even care about anything else in the women's lives. It's just because they were Latina, they were being sterilized and not even being told that this had occurred, right? The same thing was happening in indigenous communities in the 1970s. We know that somewhere between 25 to 42% of indigenous women in reservations were being sterilized without their consent. Now, why don't we have a better idea? That's a big gap, somewhere between 25 and 42% of indigenous women. Well, part of the problem is figuring out which sterilizations were done without consent. For some of these women, like, they were so ashamed of what happened to them that they don't want to come forward. They never come forward and say that they were sterilized without their consent, right? Like, it's such a shameful thing. And so all we can do really is estimate based on the documentation we have from the hospitals. In reservations, the context is even worse, because based on treaties that our federal government signed with particular indigenous tribes, the government was the one who was responsible for providing healthcare in Indian reservations, right? So these hospitals were hospitals operated by government contractors. So ultimately, like, the government is in charge here of regulating it and making sure that services are available to the indigenous populations in these reservations. And so it is clear then that this is our government then is ultimately responsible for this, and that the intention in indigenous reservations with these sterilizations was genocidal. And they were very clear, not about the sterilizations, but about the general policy. The US government policy towards indigenous communities was that they wanted them shut down. They wanted the reservations shut down. They wanted indigenous people to assimilate, move to cities out of the reservations so that they didn't have to run them anymore. And the ultimate goal was indigenous communities should not exist anymore. Right? Because the government had these responsibilities within the reservation, right? They were responsible for not providing appropriate sexual education on the reservations, right? In fact, they had programs of going into reservations and removing Native children from the community and putting them in adopted white families. Right. And the goal with that, and that is very clear in the documentation from the government, the goal was that if you give these children to white families, then they're going to be raised as white, not as indigenous. And that is an important step towards completely eliminating the indigenous communities. So you don't have to kill everyone, right? You don't have to have a program of killing. There's other eugenics things that a government and other experts can do that can still lead to basically ending entire communities. And that was the goal with indigenous communities, that through forced sterilizations, from the removal of Native children, for assimilation programs, that eventually the indigenous communities would just disappear. And we see it even today. A lot of the survivors of these relocation programs are still alive. One of the examples was Susie Yellowtail. So one of the other things they would do, especially with indigenous women, they would offer them schooling, free government provided schooling. But it was a boarding school. So they would remove Native women from the reservation, from their community, send them to a boarding school where they would be trained in some jobs. And the goal was that because they were raised outside of the reservation, that these people would not want to go back to the reservation and would lose all connection to their indigenous community. Well, those programs were actually quite successful. That did happen for a lot of people. Susie Yellowtail was one of the people who did not work with. She went to a boarding school where she was trained as a nurse. And she comes back. She comes back to the Crow Reservation. This is in Montana, roughly. The Crow land is in what is roughly now Montana. She comes back and she starts trying to fight for indigenous rights and especially access to good medical care for the Crow people on the reservation. Because a lot of the problems in the Crow Reservation, for example, was that the government hospital would be hours away. You'd have to drive hours in order to get to the hospital. And then for people giving birth, the goal was to go to the hospital, right? You wanted to give birth in the hospital, but the hospital would prohibit Native practices from taking place at the hospital. So, for example, the process of giving birth was often communal for the Crow people. So it was not just the woman giving birth and like one or two other people, like it was required at the hospital. No, for the Crow, giving birth would be like a female experience. So the women from the community would all show up. They would all be present. There would be a Crow midwife there that oversaw the birthing process. Incense was burned. There were particular rituals that were very important for the Crow people that when they tried to give birth in the hospital, they were not allowed to do. Just not allowed to do. People like Susie Yellowtail, what they would do is try to bridge that gap, right? She would often be there when Crow people were giving birth, and she would try to make sure that there was enough of the rituals that were important to the Crow that could be practiced there. Right. So, for example, the idea of this community, so you should allow more people in the room if that's what the mother wants. With her there, some of those things were possible. Right. It still didn't stop though the sterilizations. She wasn't there during the decade of the forced sterilizations, but we know that at reservation hospitals, sterilizations in the 1970s were really common. I don't have a slide for this, but because I'm going to talk about it more once we get to the beginning of the civil rights movement, because the same thing was happening in Southern hospitals, or at least that's where we have the evidence of it. That in Southern hospitals, a lot of Black women were going in for other medical issues, and they were being sterilized without their consent as well. So part of the question is, why does it matter? Why does it matter that in the 1970s, Latina women, Indigenous women, and Black women all over the country, so it's not one particular region of the country this was happening in, this was all over the place. In California, in the American South, on American reservations, all over the Midwest, that people were being sterilized without their consent. Right? Why does any of that matter, would you say? But yeah, during COVID, women were giving birth completely alone, where even like their significant others, anything like that, were not being allowed. Yeah, and that was seen as a problem. Any ideas though, why this history matters? Because one could say like, okay, well, that was in the 70s. We don't do this anymore.
I think it matters because it shows how they try to wipe the whole indigenous people out, Black people out, and but they still, managed to survive some kind of way.
Yeah, one in terms of like, hey, they were trying everything here, right? My oh, let me see what you all are putting in the and said. It does affect the economy for the group, but I want to raise the issue of what's happening today, right? The number of maternal deaths of people dying while giving birth currently in the US is really high. It's higher than in any other industrialized nation, right? We have the highest rates of people dying while giving birth. Not only that, so this graph does this. It compares the US only to other developed regions, right? So we're not talking about poor countries where there's not good access to healthcare. We're talking when we compare the US to other countries that have advanced medical research and capabilities, the number of people dying giving birth in the US is way higher. Way higher, right? But when you look at those statistics within the US itself, which group of women which are dying at the higher rates, it's also very clear, right? That's what this graph is showing. Black women are dying at almost double or more than double the rate of any other racial or ethnic group. How and why are Black women dying at such high rates while giving birth? Like, what's the issue happening here? This has been going on for years now. This is not a new statistic, right? This is now something that people have been thinking about. All right, we have the numbers. Black women are dying giving birth at higher numbers than any other group of women, and it stands out in what's happening in the world, period. A lot of it is about racist attitudes by doctors. The studies show that a Black patient and the Black infant is less likely to experience complications or death if there's a Black doctor in the room. So your chances of surviving childbirth for both the mother and the infant are much higher if there's a Black doctor or a Black nurse in the delivery room. If there's not a Black doctor or a Black nurse, then the chances increase significantly that there's going to be a complication and a death. So what is wrong with the white professionals in the room, the white doctors, the white nurses? What is happening? Well, what is happening is that they are still teaching doctors that Black people can tolerate more pain than white people. So when a Black woman is giving birth and she complains that something's wrong, she knows something's wrong in the process of the delivery, she is more likely to be ignored than if a woman of any other ethnic or racial identity complains about pain or about anything else. She's more likely to be ignored. And as a result, then complications go untreated until it's too late, and it's going to lead to the death of either the mother or the infant. Sometimes both. And that anecdotally, there's also a lot of evidence of Black women saying that when they are going in to deliver babies in the hospital, that they're not being listened to. That they're not being listened to. And it happens regardless of class status. This isn't just poor Black women. This is just Black women, period, having this issue of doctors and other medical professionals not listening to them. Right? And if we know this information and we don't do anything about it, then what we're practicing is eugenics. Right? Yeah, Serena Williams has talked about having gone through this, and she is a wealthy, she is a wealthy Black woman, incredibly wealthy. She can afford the best medical care. And I don't know all the details of her case, but she talks about how she was not being listened to. And that not being listened to, though, goes back to that idea that when Black people complain of pain, you can ignore them. They can handle pain better than other groups. And that's something that doctors still get taught. And it's an idea that is born out of slavery. This idea that like you can punish Black people more because they're Black, they can handle more pain. That was used as an excuse for the horrors of slavery. Right? So that is one way in which some of these, why part of this history is so important. In addition, some of these forced sterilizations have not stopped. We know, for example, that in ICE detention centers and prisons, they were going on as recently as a few years ago. If you want to look it up, there was a whistleblower, a nurse that went public talking about how at the Irwin County Detention Center, this is an immigration detention center run by ICE, that women were being taken to a doctor that was performing sterilizations without consent. Right? They were contracting this doctor to provide the medical care to women in the detention center. Also, oftentimes, if a woman needed the care, she's sent to this clinic where this doctor was doing the work. And there he was performing sterilizations on these immigrant women. And the nurse that was the whistleblower on this situation just talks about how the reasoning the doctor gave was that these women were coming to the US only to be a burden on the government. They were coming to have children in the US so that they could get American citizenship and be a burden on the state. And in order to stop that, they needed to perform sterilizations. Yeah, Sarah was asking if he was ever caught. So this is a case still in process. Like the nurse came out, gave all the information. She had paperwork and her testimony to what was happening. I haven't heard that anything more has happened in terms of, I just know that there's an ongoing investigation on this. A lot of the problems with these cases, though, is that the doctors will have consent forms. Or a lot of times with immigrants, the problem is if the women are deported, for example, where does the case go? Where's the evidence that this was done? Without victims, it's really hard to prove something in court. And a lot of these women were deported. So how do you find them? It's very similar to the problem of like reuniting families after they were separated. Like once people are scattered all over the world, it's very difficult to put back the pieces there. I'll stop here, but there's another case in California. In the 90s and early 2000s, they were also doing this to women in prison in California. 90s, early 2000s. That was not that long ago. They were sterilizing women in prisons without their consent. And it was already illegal. California already had a law preventing this from happening because of the case of the Latina women. And yet it still happened. It's not a happy history. It's not a happy subject. And I always think with some of these unhappy things, if we're going to make decisions, right, as citizens, as community members, we should have all the information needed to make some of the decisions we end up making and who we elect what laws we pass, that kind of thing. So I will stop here. Comments?